the day. So I'm sure Marina will want to listen to this just so she holds me to my own truths. So.
All right. Well, I guess we'll have 5 listeners for this episode then instead of the usual 4. Right.
Perfect. All right. Well, I've got my mum, my sister, and Marina, so that should get your numbers up.
Perfect. We're going to double our listenership. That's awesome.
Perfect. Well, I guess at some stage, maybe let me know when you want to start, and maybe I can give myself a bit of an introduction about what will be informing my opinions and my previous professional experience, as well as like my initial experience of being a dad. So.
Yeah, I think that's kind of more like where I want to spend the most amount of time, right? Because I think like generally like what my experience is up to this point is there seems to be a whole lot of resources in terms of like pregnancy and the different stages and like up to delivery and that sort of stuff. But it's very like mum focused, right? Which is fine, which is like completely understandable. But I feel like there's not a ton of resources for like expecting dads, you know? And I think that like you're definitely in a position where you have both like a well-informed opinion medically with like what's occurring and what's going on. But I think for more like the average like Joe like me, that's just more like waiting or anticipating that moment where it's like, here's your baby. And it's like, what the fuck am I going to do with this now? Right. Like that's kind of, so yeah. And then I'll probably just ask you a couple of questions. Like, here's some things I've heard, like how much truth is there to this? Right.
I guess like I would think that maybe you're in a similar position to me, that I was always the youngest person in my family. So I didn't have the experience of having young cousins to get used to. And I certainly drew a lot of my confidence in even those simple things like handling babies from my medical studies and my medical experience later on in paediatrics. So you're right. I think compared to the average person, I probably benefited from experimenting with other kids at work. But yeah, it's a massive unknown. And you're right, there's pretty much every resource is directed to women, because in a large amount of relationships, I think the expectation is that they're the ones that do all the preparation and they filter out what the partner needs to know for them. And certainly I would have to say that I'm a bit guilty of letting Marina do all the hard reading and myself just kind of riding the wave to a certain degree.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. I think what's really like important, and again, I don't know if maybe we'll just like shoot from the hip rather than going too structured, but you know, I think being a father, I think it's not completely easy. Certainly there's probably different types of responsibilities that we hold from mothers just by virtue of our physiology and what our roles are. But the actual change of becoming a dad or fatherhood is a massive transition for guys.
Yeah.
I think it's a massive transition for a number of reasons. Like, first of all, obviously you've gone from this dyadic relationship of you and your partner to welcoming in this new person, or if you've got twins or triplets, more than one person. And with that is a massive change in the dynamic as well. So you're now having to be mindful of not only how your behaviors, your actions, how you're prioritizing your day, how that affects your partner, how's that affecting this young child as well.
Yeah.
The other thing that changes is your kind of role within the family unit. So previously, where maybe you had to attend to your partner's needs, like emotionally as a one-on-one, now all of a sudden you've got other things you need to be considering. Some of the logistical domestic work that your partner can't isn't maybe doing, and she was previously largely responsible for that. Maybe like you and I,
in this
probably 50-50, so it wasn't a massive transition. But yeah, I think there's, pretty significant changes. And, all of a sudden, from having this one-on-one relationship with your partner where you attend to each other's needs, you can be emotionally available, all of a sudden, sometimes some guys probably feel quite sidelined because, obviously all of the mother's energy, especially in the first couple of weeks and months, is focused on staying alive, kind of looking after the child and getting sleep where they can. So sometimes dads can be pretty sidelined about that. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting chat to have too, in terms of, and you kind of touched on it before, but like how much the role of like what actually being a father is and the expectations on that has changed, like definitely even in like the last kind of like our generation, right? Like I think it's gone from that like solely to be a provider to having that expectation of, no, like you got to get your hands dirty and like be involved and like really play a significant role in not just being a father, but like being a dad. Right.
Yeah.
I think that's
I guess
cool.
that probably reflects a cultural shift in the circles that maybe we travel in. I wouldn't think that would be everywhere. And I think when, just recently I attended a lecture about providing advice to young fathers, and, they were saying that despite this cultural shift of expectations, it's still about 95% of men remain the primary income earners, at least for the first couple of years. And I think that probably reflects a number of things. I think, the fact that whilst society talks about and values fathers taking a more active role, obviously there's a differential in the pay that's available to men versus women. So quite often, for practical reasons, the man has to kind of continue working full time. I think, something else that certainly in Australia is reflected is paternity leave. I think working for the government in a hospital, I got 1 week of paternity leave. So, whilst we're saying that we value the role of fathers in raising children, I think there's still a wide scope of change necessary to really realize that potential there as well. So.
Yeah. I wonder how things kind of change from this point moving forward, right? Obviously with like everything that's going on and kind of some, like an overnight requirement for every employer to all of a sudden become an offerer of flexible working arrangements and the ability to work from home and offer those kind of setups. I think that is kind of more of a push in that direction, right? Where it's like, you can still be working and you can still be working full time, but you can kind of do the full-time work in hours that you can have a little bit more, ownership over and then kind of dictate for yourself. And we'll talk a little bit more in regards to the article that you did with the Alfred, and I'll put a link in that if anyone wants to read it too. But I think one thing that you did say in there was, being able to sort of structure your day around Mia, and like when she's napping, you're kind of like doing your study and then making time to spend time with her and not letting work kind of intrude on that time and vice versa. Right. So it'd be interesting to see how that kind of continues to evolve.
Yeah.
All right, good. So let's like start. I think like we don't want that to be the best 10 minutes of the podcast and then like all of a sudden like try to start over. So I definitely include that. But for anyone that's kind of cruising through, do you want to give a little bit of a self intro?
I guess if I was going to introduce myself, it would be in two different ways. So I guess professionally, I've had a lot of experience with families throughout my career. So initially as a pharmacist, I worked as a pharmacist for about 3 years. So obviously doing a lot of primary care medicine with families and, young adults and young children coming in through the shop doors. And then after that, I went on to do medicine, and following completion of my medical degree, I did a 6-month term in paediatrics. So that included an emergency and also general paediatrics. And concurrent to that, I did a diploma of child health through Westmead Hospital in Sydney. And more recently, as part of my psychiatry training, I'm currently trained to be a psychiatrist, and I'm about 12 months shy of getting my letters for that. I did a 6-month term in child and adolescent mental health, which kind of looked at treating really young children from the age of about 4 to 25. And treating them alongside their family for both behavioural, mood, anxiety, and in rarer circumstances, psychotic illnesses as well. So I think professionally, I've got quite a reasonable amount to draw on from that, hopefully. I guess the other part of my experience would be my personal experience of being a dad. So I've now we've got one child, so her name's Mia, and she's turning 2 years old in a couple of days. And I've been very lucky early on. So because her mother, Marina, my partner, is also a junior doctor, for a number of reasons, but initially primarily to support Marina's progress in her career, I took the opportunity to have 6 months of paternity leave, unpaid paternity leave with Mia. So, I'm sure we'll delve into what that experience was like. Yeah. But certainly that's another area where I've drawn a whole lot of personal experience that hopefully will inform any opinions that I provide today. I should say, certainly anything I say today is generally my own opinion. It doesn't reflect the opinion of any organisation I currently work for or previously.
Our listenership's not that big, man.
Yeah, sure. But I think like, I think that I wanted to flag, and I'll say it again and again, I think there's different ways to parent. So I'm going to present the way that I potentially have or what fits for me.
Yeah.
I do remember when I was a medical student asking a surgeon, like, why is there so many ways to approach this particular surgery? And his very astute response was, when there's more, if there's more than one way to do something, it means that there's no perfect way to do it yet. So I think, it's really important to take what fits well with you in terms of parenting and kind of run with it and just be a bit flexible as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess the third leg to the tripod of experience is on a personal level of our own relationship. And I know, definitely you've always been that older brother figure to me, and ironic that someone that probably taught me the most of what I know about girls and women, and now we kind of get to talk about how to raise them. So we're kind of like completely full circle.
Jeez, I feel a bit uncomfortable taking responsibility for for all of that, but thank you. Yeah, so you and I have obviously known each other since you were born, and pretty much spent most of our childhood weekends, I would say, and a lot of our holidays together, probably up until the mid or early teens for you. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've known each other for an incredibly long time.
Yeah.
Great,
yeah.
Great relationship. So. Yeah. So just make sure you edit out anything I say later about what you're like and how annoying you were when you were younger.
Yeah, perfect. But be real, be honest.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I guess kind of just to continue sort of where we were at is part of wanting to sit down and really chat is if I look at my own immediate sort of friendship group, really in terms of the guys that I grew up with and guys I went to school with, we have one of our mates who's a dad and has a 3-month-old son, right? So there's not a ton of like super experience like within that kind of immediate group of peers. But I guess the exciting thing for us is there's now 4 or 5 of us that are all within a couple of months of having our first kid. So no doubt there's a huge element of like, you can have all the theoretical knowledge and stuff like that, but it's not until you actually are there with your baby in your hands that like you suddenly kind of get a bit of a, that real feeling of, okay, we're actually in it now. Like we're actually doing it. And one thing we sort of said, a couple of times, especially for Kat and I, is like going through the whole like IVF process. It's like such an effort to even get to the point of pregnancy that you almost forget that like, it's just the start. Right, like it's this whole. So I think there's a lot of.
I interrupt you for a second. I think just whilst I remember,
yeah,
I think that's a really incredible thing to keep in mind because I think when it's been such an incredible journey to have a kid, quite often that puts very high expectations on ourselves to be the perfect parent when they actually arrive. And I think something I want to address maybe later is about the risk of trying to strive for perfectionism in being a parent.
Yeah.
So. Certainly all of the teaching, and I'll take from my professional experience, all the teaching about kind of raising children, about creating children with a secure attachment style, is all about being a good enough parent rather than being the perfect parent.
Yeah.
There's actually risks of being in the perfect parent in that you might create a level of anxiety in the child if you're constantly being highly vigilant about everything going on for them. They don't have the opportunity to explore the world and make mistakes for themselves, which might produce in them some resilience later in life.
Yes.
So I think it's really important, literally for yourself and anyone else in a similar position to cut yourself some slack when the time comes and stop trying to focus on being perfect because we know, as I said before, there's different ways to do things. So there's no perfect way yet. Yeah. It's just about making sure we're good enough to hold the child and keeping them in mind. So
I think that's kind of been almost like the line of conversation a lot with Kat and I is like for us, because it was a journey up to this point that it's like to keep that in mind at 2 a.m. when there's crying and there's like feeding to be done and you haven't had the sleep. And we'll get into the more specifics on that too. But just that constant reminder of like, hey, this was like our best case scenario, like this was something that we weren't even sure we were going to get to this point. So it seems a bit rich to now be trying to complain that like we're tired or a little bit sleep deprived. Right.
That's a great approach. You just keep that in mind.
Much easier said now. But no.
You definitely need some sort of mantra. I think that sounds like a brilliant one to be having in the back of your head when things seems like it's all falling apart. And I think, knowing you and I'm getting to know Kat more and more, I think you are kind of type A personality. So just like myself, there's always a risk of being perfectionistic and striving to be the best. But that's right. I think I think when I talk about mantras, I remember for me, I would often do the kind of, I think it was the 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. shift so that Marina could at least get a 5-hour stretch of sleep. And there was a period of, I think they call it purple crying, where Mira would just cry for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
And for me, what really helped was going back a little bit to medical school and thinking about the ABCs, which essentially, is she safe? Am I safe? Are we okay? Is there anything really disastrous happening right now? No. Have I gone through my checklist of things? Is she hungry? Have I checked that she doesn't need to be changed recently?
Okay, so this is where I take.
If I check all those things and they've all been attended to, then I just have to sit with my own anxiety and just be like, okay, we're both safe. Maybe I'm not doing it perfect. I can't figure out what's going on, but I've attended to everything that I can.
Yeah.
And in most cases, just by returning to that, taking that moment and doing it in a mindful way, that just cured everything for me internally. Obviously, it didn't always work for me, but I think any time that I start getting highly strung, children do feed off us, and that's an evolutionary thing. So I don't know if you want me to really nerd up on these things, but just like normal anxiety, if a child feels, if we go back to caveman days, if a child senses anxiety in the parents, that was probably the result of the parents scanning the environment for any threats. And so naturally the child itself has to heighten its level of anxiety and arousal just in preparation for any threat to present itself. So that's why it's quite important to try and ground ourselves in those moments. And I think that also comes back to where parents also suffer. We know the rates of anxiety really skyrocket postnatally for women, but obviously also for men as well. I think it's important to recognize when it might become problematic. And I know you had a recent conversation with Dr. Kieran Candy about anxiety and the difference between what's normal and activating and useful, and when it becomes problematic, because it's not fair for the parent, it's not fair for the partner, and it's certainly not useful for the child if a parent is kind of tipped over the edge into problematic anxiety as well. I think I've just gone on a massive tangent.
Yeah. I was like, where were we? Well, I can't remember where we started, but yeah, anyway, perfect.
I think we're talking about mantras, and I was kind of talking about for myself what was useful. So I think having a checklist when at those difficult times, like this is attended to, I've checked this, okay, I know we're both safe. Now I just need to sit with it and be comfortable with it. And I think the other thing, and again, probably taking it all different directions, is never taking it as a personal affront. Like my baby's not crying because they're angry with me. If we have that language, that's very dangerous. So it's more like, this is a child. It doesn't recognize itself as an individual apart from its mother, from me. And so it's not doing this on purpose. It's not doing it because it's my fault. It's not doing it because it hates me. So we've got to get rid of all that language and just accept that this is what babies do.
Yeah.
Generally, yes, the only way they can communicate is by crying. And sometimes they cry very loudly and for very long times. But once you attend to everything you can, then just sitting with it once everything's safe. So,
okay, perfect. So maybe if we kind of go backwards from that point and kind of how you devise that checklist and things to look for, I think that's essentially what I'm after today, is those kind of little insights to if you're doing this is kind of what to expect, and this is kind of what to keep a bit of an eye out for, just to almost kind of trying to develop a bit of a cheat sheet for the first couple of months. But if we go back, I guess kind of prior to that point, I know for me and our experience of pregnancy so far, it does feel like you're a little bit uninvolved, right? You just kind of, I'm seeing in Kat, every day she's changing, physically changing. She's obviously getting bigger. She's starting to struggle a little bit with getting out of bed and stuff like that. And so really my own experience, or my only experience up to this point of being a father, is just seeing Kat change. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, a lot of I think one expression I really like is a mother becomes a mother at the point of conception, but a father doesn't become a father until point of birth. Right. And so how is that, that whole delivery room experience, and the moment you kind of go in, make the call, get in the car, go to the hospital, to the moment where you're holding Mia for the first time, can you kind of give us a little bit of a bit of an insight into your experience?
So we had an induction, so it was a bit different to most. So it wasn't kind of like, there was no sense of urgency to everything. So Mia was basically, her growth had plateaued. And so the decision was made that at a certain time that it would be most safe to have an induction if she hadn't already come naturally. So it was all, for us, it was all very planned and methodical. So I guess that took a degree of anxiety out, if you might say that. But I guess the other privilege we had is having spent a lot of time in birthing suites during the course of our studies and professional work as well. So I think that allowed us to remain quite comfortable through a lot of the environmental kind of situation there. I guess trying to think back to that time, I mean, it all goes so quickly, you know. Even the other day, Marina was saying that she often has, this is a really nice moment she shared with me, that one of the things she often brings to mind is after it all happened, that, you know, how gentle I was with her when I kind of helped her shower and sponged her down and everything after the process. I didn't remember any of that because I was just like, well, that's just what I do. You know, and I guess for guys, sometimes if we're not so great with the emotional stuff, what we can do instead is lots of the practical stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, I think in there, I just went in and I was like, okay, I'm going to give myself a role and that'll keep me busy. It'll keep me occupied. It'll probably help control some of my anxiety about the unknown. So I think I kind of went into quite a pragmatic kind of practical approach to the whole thing. But yeah, it's incredible. I mean, you see this, you know, you see this little head kind of come out. You know, there's so much anxiety. Is something wrong going to happen? Is, you know, they're going to have all 5, you know, 10 fingers and 10 toes, or what's going to go on with all of that? Obviously, you know a lot of that from the ultrasounds, but you're never too sure until you see them in their entirety. And then you want to see their first breath. And for us, we're thinking about all these APGAR scores and everything. And so you're looking at their color, you're looking at how quickly they cry, how loud they cry, their respiratory rate, and all these weird things that probably other people don't worry about.
It's like extension of arms and legs as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, why are they taking like our child over to the resuscitator? Like, surely if she's fine, they put her straight onto the chest. And then reminding ourselves, actually, it's an induction, so they have they have to check to make sure and things like that. So
yeah,
I guess what I'm communicating is maybe I took a lot of the emotionality out of it when I was there, because I probably took some of my professional mind in, and that helped me manage some of the anxiety. I think it still wasn't that moment. Even at that moment when I saw Mia, I think I didn't feel like things had completely changed for me. And I think that has been an ever evolving thing, even as the bond kind of increased over the coming months after delivery as well.
Yeah.
Maybe that reveals a level of shock as well and everything else.
I think that's a good way to put it.
I don't know, but I mean, obviously it's a massive change, and there's a massive sense of pride, an absolutely huge sense of relief that Mia's safe, Marina was safe. You know, again, I think it just always, for me, it comes down to those things. So, yeah. But I guess in terms of preparing for that process, you know, before we knew we needed to get an induction, you know, I thought, oh, okay, what other ways, you know, we've got a lot of preparation from our studies and work, but maybe another way of changing our mindset about the delivery of itself was maybe considering other things like hypnotherapy. And that is something that we decided to do, just to kind of maybe give it a degree of calm, and our perspective of it a degree of calm. And I think that even though we weren't able to use a lot of those techniques because of the nature of the delivery, it certainly helped us view the process of birthing in a lot more calm, relaxed and natural way than maybe we had before. So do you think obviously there's courses you can do, and like you mentioned before, there's lots of resources. I think there is always a problem, regardless of what stage of parenting you're reading resources, that if you're reading too many, it can become completely overwhelming.
Yeah.
And if you read one and you think that's how I have to do it, then you're also at a massive risk as well, because that might not suit your partner, it might not suit your child and the approach that they respond best to as well. So I think I read everything just like you would when you read a lot of things, and I know you read very widely. You take everything with a grain of salt, don't you? So,
yeah. Do you think that there's an element of all that knowledge that you do have about all the complications that could potentially arise and all the potential, you know, ways that things could have gone down? I mean, obviously there's an element there that's going to increase like your level of anxieties going in there when it does cross over to the personal. But because I think for me, like part of my calm at the moment is that like I'm probably just completely ignorant to like a lot of that. So I'm also trying to keep a level of like, you know, understanding the basics and understanding like if, you know, there's breach or whatever else, that this is kind of the process. But like that's kind of it. And I kind of feel comfortable at that level. Like I don't necessarily really want to go too far down the rabbit hole either.
I guess like it's not overly useful. I think it's good to have an idea and speak to your obstetrician about, in the case that these more common complications occur, like what does that look like? And when we say common, it's still extremely uncommon. So obviously people have been giving birth for thousands of years, which has led to our civilization as it is now. Whilst perinatal death and you know, maternal death is very rare now, you know, I think that's a credit to our health system. But I think just keeping that in mind, it's kind of like, if I can give it an analogy, it's like when I get on flights, I don't feel particularly comfortable flying, but I just remember that my chances of dying on a plane are a lot less than dying when I drive down the street. So it's a bit morbid, but I guess it's a reminder that yes, I'll keep all these complications in mind, and I'm probably a little bit more heightened to the risks than you might be because I've seen some of these things happen. But still, the majority of births go through completely normal without complications. And I also have that because I've worked in great health teams and health systems. I know that when things go wrong, people who have the skills are around and they are available generally. We're very lucky in Melbourne, in Australia. And so I think I took confidence from that as well, even though I was probably a little bit freaked out at times. I think that helped. And I think for yourself, I think sometimes ignorance is bliss, but also it's good to think
it's worked so far.
Yeah, that's right. It's good to think like, what's within my purview? Like, what can I do? Like, you know, if something's wrong, that's okay. I'll take the practical approach. I'll make sure we get the right treatment, or, you know, we escalate it or whatever it is like that. But I think for me, even though sometimes, yes, I definitely freak about the what ifs because of all the professional background knowledge, I think just reminding myself in the majority of cases, this is a completely normal and beautiful process.
Yeah. Okay. So you're sitting there, you're holding Mia for the first time, right?
No, I'm just freaking out. I'm like, don't drop her, don't drop her, don't drop her. It's so precious. Yeah.
That's how I feel.
It's like, well, don't squeeze her either. Like, you can't, you know, you're like, you don't want to drop, you don't want to squeeze. You're like, I just made sure I sat down with her over my lap so that she's not going anywhere.
But the midwives and stuff, they're like not rough, but they like, from what I've heard, they're kind of, when you watch them, you sort of realize like, oh, okay, it's not as delicate as like potentially I think. Is that true?
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, you know, if babies were that delicate that you literally had to wrap them in cotton, then we wouldn't have got to where we are as a civilization because they'd all die. So yeah, they're quite physically resilient. So yeah, what might look a little bit rough is probably completely okay. And obviously, like, they would focus on the way they handle children. So there'd be certain parts of the child that they wouldn't compromise. So they'd always be giving head support and neck support. But sure, maybe with the limbs, they're a bit rough when they're rubbing it down and things like that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, particularly when when child's first born, if it doesn't kind of let out this great big cry, one way for them to increase the surfactant in the lungs is to cause a little bit of stress. And so they give it a really good rub, or they like flick its feet and things. And that stimulates the baby to produce cortisone, and it stimulates like all this surfactant release in their lungs, and then the lungs expand, and then everything's great and everyone feels really happy.
Yeah.
But yes, I think as an outsider that could look really weird. And sometimes the obstetrician will be there rubbing the back, or the pediatrician, you know, looks pretty strange. And you're like, what are they doing to my child? But I guess it's just, you know, these people, I think you got to put your faith in them to a degree if you don't have that background, because everyone is there to ensure that you have the best outcome.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Sometimes for a guy, you're on the side of that experience as well, because in that moment, your emotion, like, mostly you're just there, you know, to witness things, because physically they don't need to do anything with you. They don't need to stabilize your vital signs.
Just hold the hand.
On you unless you faint, and then they probably need to raise your legs or something like that. So yeah, you're right. I think that process can be sidelining, but I think that's just part and parcel with what it is. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And then how long did you stay in the birth suite for a couple of days after delivery?
We were lucky. So we stayed there about 3 days. I do want to say, I think that what was useful about, even though, you know, I'm not much, you know, people might charge me about being a bit of a hippie going to hypnobirthing classes and things like that. but I guess you know me and you probably think that I'm the exact opposite. What I really liked about that course is it focused a lot on giving the man a role in the process of birthing.
Yeah.
They actually physically gave you sheets to remind you things that you could do to keep busy, to be very useful for your partner. And I think that was actually an incredibly good resource for us at the time. And again, I think, guys can go in there and feel completely lost. So having a role, knowing some options of what you can do and what you can help with can be incredibly useful.
Yeah. I know Kat is like wanting to have a bit of, like do a bit of an active labor and probably wait as long as possible to get an epidural. And I know my role is just to apply sacrum pressure, right? So just
yeah. So I mean, that's funny, isn't it? I mean, I think I had different views about having an epidural, and for us, I think because it was an induction, like it wasn't completely normal, so it was taking longer than necessary. And I think it was 100%. You got to let the woman direct the epidural. I think there should be
100%.
no external pressure from the partner.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've got the same approach, and she's got her ideas that she'll go ahead with, which is great. I think for the guy, it's just about encouraging and supporting whatever the decision is for the mum.
I think that, is kind of further to the point about definitely the resource that we've had exposure to this point. And like I said, I feel like it's good background, but I'm not going to step in and tell Kat, like, okay, here's your birth plan. And like, nah, like, I don't want you to do it. Like, I say I will draw the line at, like, home birth. I'm like, there's no chance. Like, I know early on with COVID, I think it was in New York, Presbyterian Hospital, whatever, they were like banned support partners in the delivery room. And so Kat like went on this 1 week, like, kick that like if I wasn't allowed in the delivery room, like we were having a home birth because she wasn't going to go through it at all. And I was just like she wasn't going to go through it alone. And I was like, there's no chance like we're having a home birth. Like that's not like, but that is like I could not think of like wanting to put any pressure on one way or another with like how she wants to go about it. Right.
Yeah, and I guess like what you allude to is like, certainly whilst we respect each person's opinion, it's important to have these conversations. So,
Yeah.
And let someone know when you feel extremely like that for me is just not on, and having that conversation about why. So I think having, and I think what does happen is people change their opinions as they go throughout the pregnancy about what feels right for them and how it's got to look and how it might look, and then how it does look are often completely different. So
yeah, no doubt that changes too, right? I think obviously when it is your first child, you don't have any experience to like relate it back to, right? And I guess that's something that we have kind of noticed even with each other is like Kat will be like feeling this pain or that pain, and it's like, I'm not sure if I should be or if I shouldn't be. Is this completely normal? Like, is this, just part of it? And it's not having that experience. I could see if, you were comfortable with having kids and you had multiple and you were like, you know what, let's just have the next one at home or whatever, just for whatever reason. But yeah, that was for me. That was
that's a pretty big topic about talking about home birthing. And I certainly have opinions about that. And I think we'll probably leave that because I don't want to offend anyone in your audience.
Yeah, for sure.
But I guess for me, like, even though the large majority of births are normal, like there can be potential problems, and those problems are often rapidly remedied when you have appropriate people available, appropriate equipment available, pediatricians available. But if you're at home and something, tragic happens, obviously the availability of all these supports is absent. So
yeah,
but you're right. Maybe for people who've had lots more pregnancies, they're proven passage, whatever, like there's less risk of those complications. Maybe that's a better decision. And again, I should remind myself, everyone's got a right to do these things, whatever feels best for them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, so you're in the birthing suite for 3 days afterwards. And is that obviously just
I think I said I was lucky. We were lucky because we had a private room.
Yeah.
And we had lots of the nursing staff were absolutely fantastic. They were the right amount of attentive, as well as encouraging to let us do as much as we could.
Yeah.
I think another thing that I would recommend to you, this might sound a bit weird, but I'm reminding that maybe my main audience at the moment, I'll just keep in mind is you.
Just me.
Another thing that I really took on was helping with the breastfeeding. So again, that was a massive role for me, was trying to help get the right latch So as you'll learn, or you might already know about, one thing that's incredibly daunting for women is kind of getting the appropriate attachment, like the physical attachment or the physical latching during the course of breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's important for the child to actually take to breastfeeding. It's important because women can experience local trauma if there's like inappropriate attachment or latching. I'll use that term. And so I really took it upon myself to be an active part of that process. So Marina would kind of hold her breast in the right position. She's probably going to kill me for talking about this. And then I would literally make sure that, you know, the way that the Mia kind of attached onto her nipple created an appropriate suction. And we were just so lucky from that point on that it never became a massive problem. But for me, again, it was choosing the things that I could take on as my role so that I felt 100% a part of everything.
Yeah.
Or as much as I could and as much as I felt comfortable and safe doing as well. So I definitely encourage you to do that. It also means that certainly the first couple of days are hard because you're both waking up every couple of hours to feed. And obviously sleep deprivation is a monster unto itself. But I guess that's good practice for when you get home and there's no one else to help out. But,
Yeah.
And I guess, I think put your pride outside the door. I don't think you're the type of person to be too proud, but I would encourage anyone when you're there, ask questions because these people have done it all before. They've seen people who are way worse at whatever you're doing than you currently are. You might feel really hopeless and too proud to ask, or you might think it's a dumb question. Just ask them; they'll be more than happy to help you.
Yeah.
That's why I'm in that profession. So.
In terms of like the absolute like fundamental basics, like how to bath the baby, how to change nappies, all that sort of stuff, is that kind of what that like initial 3 days is with that staff? They're kind of showing you and then like assessing you, and then like on day 3, like letting you do it and show them. Is that kind of like the process a little bit there?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I mean, again, that's all a blur because you got such poor sleep, so you can't lay down fantastic memories. But certainly they teach you all the major things, so how to change properly, give you all the tips about that. From memory, I think that you have to wait 24 to 48 hours. I can't remember the exact time until you bathe the child because obviously they don't have a whole lot of fat or adipose tissue to keep them warm, so you don't want to clean off everything until that time. So yeah, but certainly before you leave, they make sure you're comfortable with the process of bathing them. Yeah. And that's a pretty anxiety-provoking thing. You're holding your child, you're so precious over this water, and then thinking, oh my gosh, what happens if I drop them in there or whatever else. But yeah, no, certainly you get all the basics there. Yeah. I guess I think the other thing, like, you know, I don't know where to bring this into the talk, but I think go into this informed, but don't go in with too many expectations of how things will or won't be. And that's about every part of the process, about going into a pregnancy, about going into the birthing, about going in directly afterwards, and then going into being a parent. Don't go in with like very strong expectations of how things are going to be. And I think, like, you know, you're going to meet lots of people with different opinions and different advice. And I would encourage you and anyone else to just be open-minded and listen to it. But listening and being open-minded doesn't mean you have to take it and you have to use that advice. But it's just keeping an open mind and listening anyway. And again, just taking what feels right for you at whatever particular moment of time that, you know, you need to implement something that someone's recommended.
Yeah. It's an interesting point that you bring up about like not being too proud to ask questions. And for me and the kind of personality that I am, like that's like never an issue. Like I probably ask too many questions more than like not enough. But I think sometimes there's an issue in like I don't really know what to ask. Like, you know, like even when we go to like ultrasounds and stuff like that, and their cat's like, do you have any questions for them? Is there anything you want to ask them? Like, what would I ask them? Like, is everything okay? Yes. Okay, perfect. Like, you know what I mean? So
that's probably in a large amount of cases all you need to know anyway. Like, you know, is everything what you expect? Like, that's about it. So, I think sometimes some partners find that, or they might experience the man's lack of interest or lack of questions, a sign of lack of interest in the pregnancy. But for some guys, all they need to know is that the mum's safe, the baby's safe, everything's sweet. And I guess I think I alluded to it before, that I certainly did rely on much of Marina's reading and research to kind of inform me about what I needed to know as well. But yeah.
I think that's the best way to do it. And I think having a baby with Kat who does have quite a large amount of like medical knowledge and medical background, and is such like, when she gets on a topic, like she really does deep dive into it. And so it's good to have, because I know that she will just filter out like the important stuff for me. Like, here's the 3 things you need to know from like everything that I've taken in. So
I guess she might be one of those people who is it, and I know she's got a lot of friends with kids, so she's got a good support network and resources to draw on from there. But I guess when people do research a lot, there is a risk that they have strong expectations about how things are going to be.
Yeah.
This is how I'm going to do it. So just trying to encourage her to be a bit flexible. If, you know, when you guys have a young kid that things aren't working, being like, okay, what other ways might there be? Like, does that fit well with how we feel about parenting? Maybe we should try it.
Yeah. Okay, so you've done your 3 days in the birthing suite, and they're like, right, time to get out. Is that kind of all starts to become pretty real?
Yeah, I mean, then you're like, oh, where's my safety net? Like, I guess for us, we were lucky we had a safety net of family that we always knew that we could call upon. That's not everyone that has that privilege. So I think for some people, they'd have a different experience of going home, where they might be living in a city with their partner and their new baby, in the absence of family or anyone else that's got experience. But for us, it was a pretty easy transition from memory. I think there's a sense of relief and the excitement getting home. I mean, you know, I think when people are kicked out of hospital, you got to think that's a pretty good way to be going, because that means that everything's fine and they're not worried about you. It's kind of like when you present to emergency and they make you wait for 8 hours and people are getting upset. You don't want to be the person that walks straight through the doors, because that means you're in a lot of trouble. I think the same is true. When you get the green light to go home, hopefully you would experience that as like, fantastic, everything's great. They're confident in me and the abilities that I've demonstrated to them in my active participation in what we've been learning here. And, you know, it means that we've probably got the minimum requirements to get home safely. So for us, I think it was probably a bit of a nice time. It's nice to look forward to being in a bigger space, because obviously, like, even though we had a single room, it's pretty tiny. And yeah, I think just having that, again, particularly if you had a shared room, getting home where you had good privacy as a family unit, you know, it's just a beautiful kind of experience. I'm trying to think of major challenges that occurred then. I think, yeah, I can't think of anything that came to mind. I think it was mostly just getting into our kind of routine. But that's a word that I kind of don't like using too much, because then it implies that you should have a routine. And I think if you take anything, it's that, like, you know, babies don't have a routine, especially early on, and you can't expect them to. Again, I think something that I want to like come back to is that, you know, babies don't see them as a separate entity or human being or autonomous being from their mother, but probably about the first 12 to even up to 16 months. So, you know, they don't get it that, like, you know, it's lunchtime or it's nighttime, I got to sleep. And, you know, I guess everyone goes into this experience expecting not to sleep. Yeah, but I've kind of lost myself on that. But I think the other thing, you can have routines for yourself, but maybe not necessarily for the kid. So for us, we knew that Mia was going to wake up regularly all the time. And we also knew it was equally important to make sure Marina got good rest. So at some stage, what we implemented for our routine was, again, Marina would get to bed at 8 o'clock, and then any feeds that occurred between then and 1 or 2 a.m., I would take care of. And then I would go to sleep and then have at least 5-6 hours sleep before I had to go to work. So we had a routine around Mia. We didn't try and fit her into the routine kind of thing. But,
and that's when you say that you would do the feeds, that's like pumping and freezing?
Yeah, so I mean, not mostly, pumping and either freezing or just putting in the fridge. Yeah. So we kind of did that because we were aware that at some stage Marina was going to have to go back to work. And personally, we were really keen to breastfeed Mia as long as possible to try and support the attachment that she had with us as her primary caregivers.
Yeah.
You know, we've obviously got views about attachment theory and personality development. So we're really into that kind of style or mode of parenting. I mean, maybe we can talk about that a bit later on. But yeah, I think that's just trying to think of other challenges that came up. Maybe not challenges. I think the other thing that's a bit of a challenge is obviously directing family members and friends about what your needs are or like what would be helpful. Because just like the man or the male if we're talking about fatherhood, might be feeling a bit lost, it's important to delegate roles. And I think that can really help family members say, look, this is something that we would love for you to help us with. Because then you can give them a task and that helps them know that, I'm not intruding, I'm actually doing something they need me to do. So for us, something that was just fantastic was when people would deliver us food,
Yeah.
I can literally hold in mind everyone that delivered us food, and that experience of just relief, and it was such a fantastic thing. And so I think giving tasks to different people in a nice way and making sure you appreciate it when they follow through on it, I think that was a good way to kind of like let people feel involved and let them know that you're holding them in mind throughout this process, and obviously letting them have appropriate access. The same is also true, putting boundaries of like, okay, sorry, coming over for 6 hours a day is a bit much at the moment. We definitely need your help. We appreciate your help. But what that help would be most useful is if you could do these things,
Yeah.
So I think boundaries are incredibly important in the early stage. We've got an incredible family. So I think they kind of could read those things without us explicitly having to say it. But I think for other families, it might be necessary to say, this is how you could best help us. And this is, at this stage, this is kind of the space that we might need at certain stages.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an interesting line where part of the reason behind us wanting to move back from Canada was wanting to start a family and kind of have a good, strong, solid, support network around. But at the same time, and I think even with managing to buy our place and kind of moving in there now, it kind of gives you, I think, that opportunity to have to figure things out on your own and kind of like work through things as, the three of you, right? Initially, I think that's super important, like all those kind of challenges and obstacles that you have to work through and overcome. And sometimes not having that safety net, whether it be like nurses or family, is like just part of what forces you to kind of get on with that experience, right?
That's right. I find, relatively recently, I've had a chat with some of my friends overseas who say are in Singapore and they have the opportunity to employ, like live-in help. So someone who would be a nanny and essentially take care of all those difficult tasks overnight and all those kind of things. I think learning for yourself on the job with the child, doing the hard things is what strengthens your bond. So attachment is a relationship the child forms with its parent, and bond is the relationship that the parent forms with the child. So I think for me, it was having to learn some of these things on the fly, having to get my hands dirty. That's what strengthened my bond to the child. Whereas I would worry if I outsourced that completely to other people, that maybe I could have lost that opportunity. But, yeah.
Yeah. And so how was that then going, or I guess that's kind of two-part question there, but before we kind of move forward in terms of like how you sort of felt when it was time to like, all right, dude, time to kind of go back to work, right? What were you not expecting, like from getting home and starting to get through things in terms of what you were expecting versus the reality? Like people have told us, like, be prepared to have, 1,000 nappies on board over the first like 3 months, or the first 6 months is like you never spend so much time in an ER, which I guess is ironic talking to you because everything that kind of happens is like your first response is like panic, right? Like temperature, like all that sort of anything that kind of sticks out to you is like that definitely went different or definitely wasn't expecting that.
No, I think it's just important to be honest with yourself that it's a difficult process. And we talked about before about navigating some of the transitions that occur in the dynamic between you and your partner, and kind of, I guess, recognizing if you are feeling a bit on the outer. I mean, I think we did pretty well with that because I'd like to think we're a bit mindful about these potential things as they come up. I think what's hard is obviously like going back to work, working to a degree which is you require of yourself. So remaining competent and confident at work on little sleep, and then kind of getting home and having to do off with the idea of necessarily getting to the gym for an hour and then coming home and chilling out. I guess like when you get home, I think often there would be a risk of someone saying like, oh, well, I've just got back from work. What do you expect me to do? But I think just holding in mind, like, if your partner's asking you for help, it's probably because they're completely exhausted. So just saying like, okay, I'm just going to suck it up. I'm just going to get on with it. there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's going to be really hard for the first couple of months as we feel it out. I'm trying to think. I mean, I work in psychiatry, so I think most of my colleagues were pretty accepting of any time I rocked up and I was a bit tired or I was not completely in a conversation with them or something. I'm trying to think of other challenges. I think it's just a sleep factor. So I think that's why it's important to prioritize not just your sleep, but where possible, particularly the mother's sleep if she's the primary caregiver, and trying to support her to get a good stretch. So figuring out ways that work for you guys to do that. Can't think of, I'm sorry, I don't have any other particular challenges at the time that come to mind.
Maybe that's kind
I
of...
think a challenge really was just like talking to family about expectations, giving roles and things like that, because, you worry about offending them by saying, oh, maybe if you can just, maybe you don't come over today, and, you're worried about the messages you're giving them. I think that's probably that kind of communication. And not only are you communicating with your family, you're communicating to your partner's family as well, potentially if they're in the picture. And that's got its own challenges too. So,
yeah. I think maybe there's a little bit of comfort in that there's not anything that really sticks out that you're like, fuck, like, was not like...
I think you just got to be adaptive, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing again. It's like, I might not be doing things perfectly, but I'm doing them good enough and everyone's safe. Like, yeah.
I feel definitely that the position that Kat and I are in, where we do work together, work from home, we do have a lot of command over our schedule and over our calendars, and how we can kind of integrate the two to either coincide or not necessarily need to overlap is going to be super beneficial. And so that's...
You have to have already occupied a lot of space together throughout your week.
Yeah.
I guess just like COVID has done for a lot of families, it kind of throws them together for prolonged periods of time. I guess early on that might be the case that's a bit of a challenge for some people, but certainly for yourselves, I think that's not going to be an issue at all. So
yeah, and I think that's my hope would be that for that, it's not a case of like, okay, I've got to go to work, and then I come back and it's like, okay, now I'm sort of like clocking on to a second job here, and I'm about to put in like another 4 or 5 hour shift, right? So I think that's, for us, obviously in a very, very fortunate position with that, and hopefully that kind of is the reality of the situation, is that it's, we can do 2 or 3 hours here, 2 or 3 hours there, and kind of do a bit of back and forth so that you have that bit of break between the two. So I mean, again, there's always like expectation, and there's exactly what happens when baby's got other ideas. And if this child is Kat's daughter, no doubt there'll be a number of challenges come with it. But yeah, I think for the most part, it's more like you said, like you can't really, there's no perfect way to do it. There's no necessarily way to knock it out the park in every factor. And it is just, I think for the most part, as long as you are working to do your best and be attentive, like you're kind of ticking most of the boxes, right?
I think that talks to parenting throughout the child's life course. Is I think if you're being mindful about how your behaviors and your actions might have consequences for your child, just by virtue of being mindful, you're probably completely fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, just thinking like, how is my child going to experience it if I yell at them right now? How useful is that? Like, what does that communicate to them about communicating frustration and anger? When you just start being inquisitive about the consequences of your own action, that's like what I think they're good ingredients for making a good parent.
Well, for good self-awareness too, right?
That's probably the best way to describe it in a nutshell. Yeah.
I remember one thing that that you said to me early on, which has like stuck through, and I think probably resonating more, now knowing that we're having a daughter too, is like you said to me, the relationship that I foster with my daughter is I'm basically setting a precedent for every one of her relationships with men going forward. And I think that
I love that point. I can't remember where I came across that, but it's like there was 2 life lessons that this person said was the most important thing they did for their kids. So one was demonstrating to their children, patience, love, and I guess support of their partner, because what they propose this does is sets up a template of how your children will then expect their own partners in the course of their life and adulthood to treat them. So the way you demonstrate the appropriate way to treat my partner, that's what they'll expect of others to treat them in a relationship. So obviously, if you're yelling at your partner, if there's domestic violence, what you're telling your kid is this is kind of normal. This is, you know, this is what you should expect in relationships. Relationships are hard because they come with violence, assault, and all these things. But if you instead show this is what you should expect from a relationship, someone who can sit with frustration, someone who doesn't lose their temper, someone who can communicate in a proactive and positive way, then, you know, hopefully that's the kind of partner your child will look for in the future. You know, I guess in psychiatry, we look at people a lot and look at the partners they choose and think about how that might be a reflection of the type of person their dad or their mum was. And maybe they're trying to undo certain elements of the relationship they had with their parents or whatever. So that analogy worked pretty well with me, both like personally in what I believe, but also for my professional as well. I think the other tip that I kind of came across around the same time is, you know, as your kids get older, instead of trying to get them involved in the things you're particularly interested in, you know, try and find out what they're interested in and encourage them to do it. Because, you know, even if it comes to later on when they're looking for a career, we might want them to be a doctor, say for us, or, you know, you might want them to be a business person and someone who's really into fitness. But what we know is when people do something they're passionate about, and what you've demonstrated to me through your interest in fitness and nutrition, when you do something you're interested in, you do well at it, and you derive a lot of happiness and pleasure, which isn't only experienced internally, but it's experienced by everyone around you. And that's what you want for your kid, I think. That's what most people would want. So yeah, that whole idea of finding out what they want to do and just giving them the means to do it. Obviously, if it's something like drugs, like that's a bit different. But where it's an interest per se, like, you know, I think that's a really important thing as well. So
yeah. I think like on that, right? Like I think because I'm a really big fan of where like the AFLW is now, right? Because, and that's like the, you know, women's footy. Because for me, I quite like that idea that for me, that's something that I am so passionate about, that could be something that I could share with my daughter. And if she was passionate about it, that there's actually something that she can do in that direction now, right? But I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, it might not necessarily be that, oh, she falls in love with like the game of football, but it might be just that she looks back and remembers like how we would spend the weekends, like watching games together on the couch and like cheering the Bombers, or like going to the park and like kicking the foot. And it's like having those kind of positive like experiences with the sport would then be what creates that like enjoyment and builds that kind of passion, right? So it's like, without forcing her to like, oh, I want you to play footy because I like footy. It's kind of like, oh, well, if you're having a positive experience around, you know, like this particular field, then that might be something that you do want to do more because you do have such positive like association with it.
Really, yeah, 100%. I think you remind me of two things. So one, I'll go off my personal experience because it does remind me of something. I think when I got back to work, and I was no longer kind of in there all the time, I did start feeling a bit disconnected potentially. And so what I tried to do was make sure that before work and after work, there was a period of time where it was one-on-one with Mia and I. I started that from a pretty young age. I think the problem is that if the partner's always around, then they just kind of, the default is that they attend to whatever it is. But I think if you kind of set out some time, I think for us it was about half an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening. Not only did that give Marina time to go attend to stuff that she needs to do for herself, but it meant that I could continue that relationship I was having with Mia early on. And the same was on the weekend. There was, you know, when she was probably about kind of 10 months old, I think Marina kind of reminded me, like, you know, it'd be really good if you spent more time one-on-one with Mia. And that was at that particular time, like Mia was quite clingy to Marina. But that's okay. We instituted that. And what happened, the more time I spent with Mia, obviously the more comfortable and confident she was in me, the more confident I was in myself. And like, again, it just recapitulated that incredible amount of love and comfort and confidence we had in each other. And so, and I now going to the professional side of that, when I saw a lot of children with behavioural disturbance or mood disorders through my professional employment, a major intervention was always trying to help the family identify time that they can spend with their child, which is undistracted, so which they go completely offline. They turn their phone on silent or leave it in another room. No screen time at all. Obviously, this is for older children where you might be engaging in activity. And trying to set that up as a regular thing. So it might be kind of every Saturday morning, say my kid's like 7 years old or something, every Saturday morning at between 10 and 12, it's just going to be me and my child, or my child and I should say. My mum would chastise me about my grammar. So my child and I are doing some sort of activity that they enjoy, and not using that as a way of manipulating them. So in the course of the week, not saying, if you don't do this, we're not spending that 2 hours together, we're not going to the park together. So that time has to be non-contingent on absolutely anything else. And it's always a constant. So they can know no matter what the heck's going on in their life, your life, at 10 a.m. on Saturday, you're going to be completely available for them. Yeah. And that communicates such an important message to children as they grow older. And I think that's the other thing that I took from that term. Generally, parents would bring you these children and they're like, oh, this problem's going on in their behavior, or they're really down, or they're disturbed at school. Very rarely do children less than 13 years old have any formal psychiatric illness. More often it's a reflection of what's going on in their family and then problems with the relationships. I think by trying to be mindful of these things early on, be mindful of spending time with your children, which is undistracted and shared enjoyment, I think that sets the perfect pace for them developing into kind of very well-rounded individuals as they get older.
Yeah.
Again, I just took that pretty far, so you've probably forgotten where we were, so I'll forgive you that.
That's fine, mate. Look, when we started this podcast, I used to have like oh man, here's the 6 questions like I need to ask. And all I found was that I just get a little bit too fixated on like trying to ask the questions and not enough on like the response. So go for it, mate. People are sick of hearing my voice too. Talk as much as possible. Take us on the 10.
I'm aware that we're kind of at the hour mark. I just really want to hammer home that message that in terms of just broader ideas of parenting, that everyone has really different ideas about what's right. I think you've just got to be really careful about when you communicate to people the way you're doing something, that you don't diminish their ideas and their beliefs, and you don't insult people, and just keep in mind that there's different ways to do things. I kind of mentioned before that we're quite into attachment-informed parenting, which is hard work, I think. Certainly I've got other friends who are quite into kind of more old school approaches, and certainly even family members who have an older approach to things about controlled crying and things like that. So I guess offline from this, maybe we can talk more about that. But I think just, people do, like anything, when you're giving advice to people, you obviously want them to take your advice, not only because you think it's right, but if they go ahead and do it, then that confirms what you're doing is right as well. You've got to be careful about kind of being offended if people don't do what you suggest and things as well. And just, again, recognizing there's different ways,
Just say yes.
Yep. In terms of other points, I think the other really important thing is that we're all different. And yes, the perceptions and expectations of fathers are different these days. But that doesn't mean that every dad has the capabilities or the set of tools that they need to be, an attachment-informed parent who's into talking about emotions and is open to other people talking about emotions, about sharing their internal turmoil or whatever it is. So I think what's important in all cases is dads having a think about, what kind of person am I? What's in my comfort zone? Maybe I'm just comfortable being the provider. I've got one friend whose dad was a plastic surgeon and his mother died at an early age, so he was raised by nannies. So his conception of a father figure was someone who literally just made money for the family, made sure they had absolutely every physical, material thing they needed, but was not available emotionally. And you kind of see that in his style of parenting, is that he does the same. This guy works 14, 15-hour days, runs 2 different businesses, and is an engineer. So his idea of being a father is quite different to my own. And that's not to say that he's wrong, but I guess he's trying to play to his strengths. I guess the only risk of that is that in the absence of other family members who might be able to support his partner on more practical things in the domestic or home side of things, there's a risk of her burning out. So I think, if we recognize in ourselves that we don't have all these qualities to be the father that maybe our partner wants us to be, or we even want to be, then looking at what's in our support network and how can we utilize that support network to fill in for areas that I don't feel comfortable doing. Does
Do you
that
think
make sense? I mean, that's a pretty big
do you,
spiel that I just gave.
do you think that's like one of the kind of big contributing factors to when you do see relationships that do break down with young kids, is just that there has been potentially like just a lack of communication and in regards to dealing with things that are going on in that adjustment period? Or is that a hugely
Um,
like broad general statement to make?
it's pretty hard, isn't it? I think especially with younger kids presenting with behavioural disturbance or mood disturbance or anxiety, it very rarely is about them having an anxiety or mood disorder in themselves, and it more reflects problems going on in the family dynamic. And obviously, the strongest dynamic is often between the parents and how they're operating. And then obviously, as a side to that, is how the parents are interacting directly or indirectly with their children as well. So I'm trying to think. I mean, often, and like I said before, there's often that advice, just that really easy general advice about how to create a relationship with your child. So the best sort of discipline doesn't come from telling your kid what to do, but it comes from your kid enacting what they know their expectations are. And that best comes from having a good relationship with your kid. I guess the other thing we talked about, kind of creating a template for your child of how they should allow their partner to treat you and things. Often part of the therapy for us in treating this kid's disturbance was trying to help the parents strengthen their relationship through couples counselling, themselves finding non-contingent time that they were going to spend together, which might provide opportunities to have more open and expansive conversations rather than just the nitty-gritty you need to fix at that moment sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if that kind of answers the question, but I'm getting myself lost. I'm trying to impart all these things that have been useful for me to think about, and also in experiences at work too. So
I feel like obviously it's a pretty big topic, and it's probably one that we're not going to get all the way through in an hour. And I feel like probably for the first 45 minutes of this hour, we've been like something we want to come back to. I think we've probably used that statement quite a few times. So obviously, like being conscious of time and your time as well, and Mia's nap time. Maybe we should like reconvene for a bit of a catch-up chat, and we can do sort of a second part and kind of go back through. Maybe we can both go back, have a listen, and make a note of every time we say we'll come back to it.
I hate hearing my voice, let alone looking at a video of myself for an hour and 9 minutes. That's going to kill me.
I'll just send the audio to you.
All right, perfect. Yeah, it sounds good. I'm just trying to think if there's any parting shots I want to make.
Yeah.
I think. I think what actually, just thinking about the period directly after Mia was born, I think, I keep saying go in there with no expectations, but to be honest, my expectations were that it was going to be absolute hell. I wasn't going to sleep. I was going to feel probably proactively depressed. So I think my expectations were very low. And so it actually meant that everything was better than that. And so I actually found the whole process pretty good.
So is that advice?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, it works for me. I guess, yeah, you just got to choose it to work.
Personal or professional advice?
Yeah, take it how you like it. But,
I mean, I think my thing is going in with trying to go in with like no expectations, right? And just sort of trying to take it as it comes. And like I said, like very early on, like just trying to remind ourselves that, hey, this was once upon a time, like something that we didn't think was going to eventuate. And so everything from this point forward is like gravy, right? It's all bonus. So
yeah, just interpret things positively, like, oh my God, she just like took another shit in a nappy.
Yeah.
Like, oh, isn't that great that her bowels work? Like, we're so lucky.
I get to practice. I get to practice on nappy changing skills.
Yeah, that's right. I think you've already got a very positive growth mindset, so I don't think that's going to be an issue for you.
Yeah.
And I think the last parting thing is just like for dads who don't feel like they're doing it right, they're not doing anything right, they feel incompetent, or they're worried about their mental health or the mental health of their partner, there's avenues of support and help. We kind of took the opportunity, recognizing that there was probably areas of our communication that could be strengthened before having a kid. Marina and I went through some couples counselling just to kind of strengthen our ability to communicate effectively and appropriately. And I think that was a really good opportunity that we took. But similarly, I think if you find if a young parents find that the dynamic changes quite severely, and that it's not functioning in the best interest of themselves or their family, then it's time to look for help. Certainly we're in Victoria, Australia. I know that resources I would recommend people to is like Relationships Australia, and they have a particular chapter of that organisation which looks at supporting young dads. And obviously at any time that you're feeling unsafe in yourself, again, recognising, increasingly we get better at picking up postnatal depression in women. And that's on everyone's mind. There's elevated levels of postnatal depression in men, which reflects all these changes that are going on for them, and sometimes a sense of things being out of control that they can experience as well.
Yeah.
So I think that, if you notice that in yourself, or if you notice it in your partner, then seek help. And obviously the easiest way is through your GP, or just even telling your mate, telling your family, just starting the conversation with someone is really important.
Maybe
and also, everyone feels incompetent to start with. Doesn't matter how, I feel like a competent and relatively confident doctor at work. I felt completely clueless and incompetent as a dad when I first started my 6 months of paternity leave by myself at home with Mia. So give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Have your mantra, like you said. Go through your Dr. ABC or your checklist of safety and everything else, and then you'd probably find you're pretty sweet.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe that's something that we can kind of build the next chat on, is kind of like you've done sort of like the physical changes and maybe some of those sort of mental health changes and perspective changes as well. Because I know that is for you, like, where you do enjoy going deep diving and stuff like that too. And I think that you're a wealth of knowledge in that area. And I think that, and this is kind of something that we touched on with Kieran as well. Like it's encouraging to see men's health come more and more into the light. But I think it's almost a situation where it's like the more we talk about it and the more we see it, the more we realize the more there is, right? And I think that, like, even today, for me, like reading that thing that you sent where you were having a chat about postnatal depression in men is not anything I ever considered or really even heard of, like, until an hour ago. So yeah, and I'm sure it is, if there's
way next time. And I guess the other thing that people can use this podcast is to cure their insomnia.
Yeah, exactly. Something to listen to at 2 a.m. in the morning.
That's it. My drowning voice.
Straight to sleep. Just put headphones on the baby and then perfect, mate. Thank you so much.
All right. See you later.